This is the first debate in LAMPA I'm moderating. I assume that the end of the sounds means that the debate can now start. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this debate organized by the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Copenhagen-based think tank Monday Morning in cooperation with the Northern Dimension Partnership on Culture. My name is Jonas Lindholm. I'll be moderating today's debate. I'm the impact director in the think tank I just mentioned. I'm a sociologist and social researcher of background. Before I proceed, I would like to just pass the microphone to Dacia, who will speak briefly on what and who the Northern Dimension on Culture is. Welcome, Dacia.
Thank you, Jonas. I think I will stand here. Okay, es tad latviski. Labdien, arī no manas puses priecājos jūs redzēt šeit mūsu šodienas diskusijā. Mani sauc Dace Resele, esmu no Ziemeļu dimensijas kultūras partnerības sekretariāta. Es jums vienkārši iedošu tādu rāmi, kāpēc mēs esam šeit un kāpēc šī diskusija. Mēs esam starptautiska organizācija, ko ir dibinājušas 10 Baltijas jūras valstu un Ziemeļu valstu kultūras ministrijas, un mēs nodarbojamies ar dažādām lietām, kas ir saistīts ar kultūras un radošajām industrijām. Mēs tā kā veicinām, mēģinam dot arī savu ārtavu tādā ilgtspējīgā ekosistēmas attīstībai, un kā mēs to darām. Mēs tā teikt ražojam zināšanas, ir dažādi pētījumi, kā arī radošās darbnīcas. Tad mēs arī dodam platformu, lai praktiķi varētu satikties un savā starpā sadarboties dažādos līmeņos, gan ministrijas, gan organizācijas, gan tie paši darītāji. Un kā arī mūsu viens no tādām tēmām numur 1 ir starpsektoru sadarbība, un šeit mēs tiešām ļoti daudz ieguldām savu laiku, enerģiju, un viens no šiem te virzieniem ir māksla un labbūtība. Tāpēc arī šodien šī te diskusija, es skatījos, ka vēl te bija 2 teltīs diskusija par vientulību. Un mēs šodien paskatīsimies uz šo tēmu no citas nedaudz perspektīvas, kā iekļaujošais dizains un vai viņš spēja mūs paglābt no vientulības. Un šeit mēs runāsim vairāk par sociālā riska grupām, bet par to tad tālāk arī Jonas un mūsu lieliskie eksperti. Un vēlreiz paldies Ziemeļu ministru padomei par aicinājumu piedalīties šīs diskusijas veidošanā. Paldies Jonas un Mandag Morgen par palīdzīgu roku veidojot šo sarunu. Un tad, lai mums labu klausīšanās un gatavojiet jautājumus, būs interesanti. Paldies.
Thanks, Dacia. So those of you who looked on the screen out there, you will see that in this tent today, there's debates around trust, there's debates around renewable energy, there'll be a debate around online radicalization, all big issues. In the next hour, we'll also discuss a really significant issue that's impacting our society, which is loneliness. And we'll talk about how we can combat loneliness. And why are we debating this? Well, because as I said, it's a significant challenge. Loneliness is on the rise in the Nordic and Baltic countries. It's affecting both young and old, and it's profoundly impacting the quality of life of those who are affected by it, including citizens with disabilities or with mental health issues. It's pushing people into the fringes of society. What we also know is that loneliness can almost be as fatal as smoking. Individuals suffering from loneliness often suffer an earlier death. So in other words, this is a significant issue at the individual and at the societal level. And that's a challenge that calls for attention, hence we're discussing it today, but also at a broader level. And it's an issue that calls for a broad effort from a cross-section of stakeholders, and also requires an exploration and application of a range of different tools And one of the tools, or rather one of the principles that we will be discussing today is the concept of inclusive design and what inclusive design has to offer in terms of being an agent of social change. Inclusive design as a principle, once applied, that can forge stronger, more cohesive, inclusive communities, and hence combat loneliness. And the debate we're having here today in LAMPA is part of a series of debates at all the democracy festivals in the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries on this particular issue on loneliness. And the purpose of this, what we call a debate relay, is to try and identify and debate barriers and solutions to effectively address and overcome loneliness across the region, share examples of what works and what doesn't work across the Nordic and Baltic regions, and then eventually the insights, all the recommendations from all these festivals, including today's, it will end up forming a report to the Nordic Council of Ministers to help inspire them in their new action plan in the social area in connection with their Vision 2030. This debate here today stands on the shoulders of two previous democracy festivals debates in Denmark, where the issue was the interplay between technology and youth loneliness, and a debate 10 days ago at the Almedalen, the Swedish Democracy Festival, where the debate was loneliness among the elderly. And then in a few months' time, I'll be moderating a debate in Estonia, where again the focus will be on loneliness among young adults. To help us try and answer some of these really important questions of whether inclusive design can combat social exclusion and loneliness, we have an absolutely wonderful panel of experts with us. Let me start with you, Anna, and I hope I pronounced the names correct. Sabitka?
Almost.
Almost, there you go. Social anthropologist specializing in aging, care, death, and health equality. You're currently a PhD candidate at the University of Vienna, researching state care for older adults in rural Latvia. You also teach medical anthropology and medical ethics, and you work as a researcher at the St. Paul's Strandang Medicine History Museum.
Yes.
Oh, welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Hi.
Next to you is Barbara Abele. Yep. Professor at the Art Academy of Latvia, design visionary. One of your main teaching interests is trying to react to the changing phase of design, to include the social, the responsible, the emotional, and the sustainable aspects of design, both in the study process, in all collaborations, and in all contexts. Also, welcome to you. And finally, Baiba, welcome to you. You're head of the Ability Movement. You're an activist for service dogs. You're known for your work in the Service Dog Association Theodors. You're known for your stand-up performances, your writing, including your recent book, I believe, Elfa, a Dog, Not a Human. And Elfa is actually with us today.
Yes, he is.
Lovely. Lovely. Welcome to all of you. There will be opportunity for questions from the audience, not necessarily at the end, but if you want to react to a point that's being made here at the panel, it's very simple. Put your hand in the air and we'll get a mic to you. So you don't have to wait to the end if you really have a burning question on the basis of what's being discussed here. Now let's get started. And we will actually start with reflecting on a question that the participants in Sweden had last week or 10 days ago. And the question that the panelists in Sweden put forward to you as a panel is, how can we create intergenerational meeting places where both young and old people can meet? So essentially, you have rising loneliness among young people. You have rising loneliness among aging elderly. How can we create meeting places that forge closer links between the two generations? Who wants to go first?
I want to go first. Okay, actually, I thought carefully about this question, and I think I have to step back to answer it. And I have to highlight specific obstacles that Latvia is actually currently facing. And there are two, I'd say, two huge obstacles. One is I don't have hard data to support that, but over the years going over tons of policy documents that are supposedly tackling challenges of aging society, I have come to a conclusion that one of the biggest issues is that we as a society, and that is often reflected in politics and on policy level too, have tacitly accepted that late life or older adults' life, it's okay to spend those years in poverty, or at least, without aspirations for enjoyable life. And that is one huge issue that we have here. And the other, thinking about this intergenerational meeting spaces, is that the issue with older adults is usually physical isolation, whether they are spending their years and days at home and in apartments, or those are nursing homes or other centers. And for youth, for young people, it's not as much the physical space that is an issue, right? So, and I think this is one of the issues why they don't meet. And concerning older adults, the other issue is as well that there is both perceived but also actual feeling that we are not welcomed in a lot of public spaces, right? I'm not even talking about like physical unavailability of the places, but just mentally perceived and actual feeling that they are not welcomed. So in order to answer the question, I think to bridge the gap, we have to use spaces that are already existing. We don't have to create new spaces, but spaces that older adults are, and I'm talking about physical spaces, but about all older adults, not those who are only, in associations, because usually people who are in like senior associations, they'll be active their entire lives, right? I'm talking about everybody. So we have to use spaces, physical spaces that are already there, that people are familiar with. Those could be schools, those could be public libraries, and we have good examples of public libraries and also in rural areas, right? And those could be pop-up events, not in a city center and concerts. They have to be in residential areas and residential complexes, right? And speaking of like rural areas, and not even villages, but even remote rural areas, those should be like mobile. We have to bring people there. We have to bring events there, right? And then it's even more challenging because when we're talking about Latvia as a graying society, there are differences between towns and cities and rural areas. Rural areas are emptying.
Lots of obstacles, it sounds.
Lots of obstacles.
We will be discussing solutions later, you know that, because we talked about that. So Barbara, what would you answer your colleagues in Sweden on this question?
I absolutely agree with Anna about the spaces, that we have enough space all around and we don't need to create new one. But I think crucial thing is what to do in these spaces. How to create some common interests. I think they should be common interests because it's not kind of storytelling or fairy telling during the meetings of two generations with so big gap in between. So I even would like to say that they should to establish some deal or some business among them. Otherwise, there is no reason to stay together.
So there has to be a purpose for that.
Yes.
Baiba, what's your reflections on it? Is it an artificial issue, essentially, or is there an intrinsic value for the state or for whatever sort of stakeholder to actually be trying to establish a space for intergenerational meetings?
I think it is a real issue, but for that, I think first of all we will need to work with both of those groups just to help them to overcome stereotypes about each other, right? That old people are not interested in young people and vice versa. There are stereotypes that what we can learn from all generations, right? we are not society like in Japan. They really respect the older generation, and because of that, there is this that wider dialogue. So just to create the dialogue and help to overcome the stereotype about each other, and that would help to overcome the fear of becoming old, right? And then becoming older would be something good, not something to fear. Yeah.
So there seems, from what you're saying, Alosana, there is a discourse in society or narrative around aging, which is intrinsically negative, or?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't use the word negative, but as I said, we kind of have accepted that once you move into your late life, you have to be humble, right, without aspirations. And I think that is one of the issues why people don't feel comfortable. But speaking of these, places, I mean, this is just one example, right? And I'm not sure whether we have something in Latvia like that, but like community gardens could be, because I agree we have, right? No, but where generations actually coming together. I mean, because I agree with Barbara, there has to be common interest. We can't create, we can't force it, right?
All right, thanks for your really elaborate answers to the question from the Swedish Democracy Festival. Now let's move on. As I said initially, what we're trying to sort of embrace here is the role and merits of inclusive design, and how that is relevant in the context of preventing or combating loneliness and social exclusion. But Barbara, before we do that, I would, for myself, but I guess also for parts of the audience here, can you sort of elaborate a little bit on what is inclusive design? What does that actually entail in process and in product, or whichever way that you would like to describe it?
Actually, I'm not the right person because I'm hating definitions in all those senses. But the inclusiveness, of course, we are talking about inclusive design in all senses of different phases of design, first of all. We have already different range of design. We have social, service, communication, information, and many other branches of design. And nowadays, of course, we are applying as a part of inclusiveness in every field. Actually, inclusiveness is like a salt for food. You cannot not take in consideration inclusiveness nowadays in accessibility, physical accessibility, in information design, in product design, in processes. If you are not taking in consideration inclusiveness of variety of the user, you are a loser, actually.
And if we look at inclusive design at a more sort of normative level, it actually has intrinsic connections to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the later Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, i.e., inclusive design at its core is about the elimination of discrimination, and it's about creating equal opportunities for all people. In your research on elderly and aging adults, you were you were mentioning just before. How then are we faring here in Latvia in terms of translating these important and normative principles that Latvia has signed up to? How are we faring in terms of equity and non-discrimination? How are we faring in terms of translating those into actionable policies and priorities through inclusive design?
We have a tendency to fail. That would be the short answer. To elaborate a bit more, we are very good with writing plans and with writing social policies. We have tons of them. And we use all the correct terms that EU wants us to use. At first we used active aging, then EU changed it to healthy aging. It was successful aging, then it changed to active aging, then we used that term. Now we're using healthy aging, which is the correct term right now. But the problem is, how do we actually implement those plans in the reality? And my short answer is no, we actually fail. And then we draw this beautiful picture when I'm reading these plans. So the terms are correct. The ideas are also nice ideas, but rarely there is the next step that actually implements. And it's the same goes, for instance, for so-called deinstitutionalization project for adults with mental issues, right? So we kind of have started, but I have seen in reality how a lot of times there's no next step. So, okay, we do have 2-year program for people in so-called halfway houses, right? And we do prepare people and we teach them and we're trying to secure some jobs for them, but rarely there is this next step, right? And it's the same with policies of inclusiveness concerning older adults. Reality is way different from papers, and I think one of the problems is that even when we use those nice terms as healthy aging, there's never been a discussion but what really that is, what that really entails, right? What is the core? What does that mean? And in reality, it has changed into, well, moral projects of individuals, right? That it's not so much about how we, for instance, as a country, as a state, as a municipality, for instance, can help creating inclusive society, but it becomes it's still on my shoulders, right? It's on the shoulders of that older adult or any other actually adult, right? How we lived basically successful life, and it turns against us in reality. So I think that's the biggest issue.
Thanks, Anna. And by that, this sort of disconnect between the policy level and the practice level is something I understand from our conversations that you are obviously also very preoccupied with. You wrote a piece which I enjoyed reading, a piece titled "What Trains and Toilets Have in Common." And I know this is only on the physical accessibility, but it's kind of illustrative. So help us understand, what do trains and toilets have in common?
Yeah, I enjoyed actually writing that piece, but it's about accessibility, and it's about, again, what Anna said, right, that on the paper we have accessible trains. In reality, I cannot use the train, accessible train. And that's the same about the bathrooms. We need to have accessible bathrooms, and we don't have them a lot of times. Or they are used as storage places for other things, like the bins and so on and so on. Yeah, but then this connection between the policy level and reality, the root, I think, is just the conversation. There's a lack of conversation between the organizations who are really working in reality with those issues. Either they are older people or people with disabilities, and policymakers. And when there is this connection in communication, then we cannot expect good results. Because if there would be this connection, then policy could come from the practice, not vice versa. Because when it's vice versa, then it's harder to implement.
Just staying on this topic of accessibility, in the same sort of commentary, you also put the question out there without really answering it. So maybe that's what you do now. It's a bit of a stark sort of image, but you asked the question, what if Ukraine had happened here?
Yes, and I don't have yet an answer to that. I can only imagine that probably I would not be able to get down from my 4th floor where I'm living, right? And I don't know what would happen. I still don't have yet an answer because it would depend also on attitude, and I think different people with disabilities would have different experiences, right? Ones who have somebody who cares for them probably would be okay, but we cannot forget that there are many people who don't have who cares for them, like on the emotional and physical level. Yeah, so I think experiences would be different.
Thanks for that, Baiba. Now, we've stayed a little bit at the theoretical and the conceptual level here. Now let's try and be really concrete. And in talking to you before the debate, I understand that most of you were a bit unsure about how concrete we could actually be when it comes about highlighting best practice. So let's take this whole concept of inclusive design and be really sort of concrete. And maybe, Barbara, you can start. So we're looking at the nexus, the combination between inclusive design and social inclusion. If you look across Latvia, where do you see best practice? Where do you see really, really good examples of it that deserves scaling or replication? What comes to mind?
I have not immediately in mind. I know many examples, many cases, many projects, what was done with goodwill and with good results. But if we are talking in continuation about those both parts, social issues and inclusiveness, there is not so much. And I actually would like to turn back to that what Baiba said, that this disconnection among policymakers and realization is also wide range. It could be public sector, it could be private sector, industries, different kind of them. That perhaps we are thinking too much, or wrongly we are thinking that there is some part of society who call themselves inclusers, and then there is another one part of society what need to be included, and that is absolutely wrong approach. And I trust very much in international platform Design for All, and Peter Kircher is one of the establisher of this organization and still on board. And he's always starting discussions like today, that he's asking everyone who is sitting in presence, stand up. And then he's saying, so he's starting allowed to sit the persons who has glasses, who has even once in her life broken a leg or head, who had kids or who had elderly persons at home. And then all audience is sitting down, because it's not about them, it's about us. And at least once in a life, but for sure it's much more times, we need to be included and we need accessibility in our everyday life. And when we will change the paradigm of the thinking, and we will start to think that it's for our well-being, it's for our good life, then it will work.
I totally accept the premise that this is, that this is a challenge, but still, the concept of inclusive design has been around for 30 years, or even more than that. You've been teaching students at the academy in this for many years.
20 years.
There must have been improvements over those 30 years. So what are, and this is for all of you, what are some of those examples, Baiba, that you meet in your everyday life or that your research is showing? What are some of those examples that we should actually shed some light on and say, look, something good was happening here.
Absolutely.
We could scale that. We could bring that even further out. I think that's the conversation we're trying to have, because we often stay at the analytical level or we stay at the really critical level, and that's totally warranted. I totally buy into that. But if we are to bring forward, bear in mind, if you are to bring forward recommendations and best practice also eventually to the politicians, let's see if we can at least highlight some. And this is also for you in the audience. If there are examples, if there are best practices out there that you find have succeeded, in including people from, if you like, say, outside the mainstream into the mainstream, what could those be?
Yeah. For example, this festival, right? This is a good example, and one of the rare places where I can get on the stage without being lifted up. Like, as much as I do not prefer being lifted up because I'm too heavy. No. But, yeah, so for example, this festival, or we have the city, Latvia, and there they have a really good connection between municipality and Blind People Association, people with vision disability, and so they are one of the most accessible for people who don't see. One of the most accessible places in Europe. We don't know about that. We don't go public with this so much as we would need, but according to guidelines, they are the most accessible, the easiest. There's to go around if you don't see, and then this festival LAMPA and the Latvia, and a bit stepping back what Barbara said about the inclusion. That's really true. When we will start to think in terms of we, then it will change everything, right? Because also universal design, or even if we go further, universal thinking is when I include also myself in that thinking. When I think that ramp is not only for Baiba, but someday if I break my leg, or if I become older and I cannot walk, I will need that ramp as well. Then it will change situation, and also speaking from the so-called minority group perspective, it's also how we include able-bodied people, right? It's not, as Barbara said, it's not only about including minority in the majority, but it's also how that minority includes majority. And thinking about the disability and statistics are wise in declaring that people with disabilities are more and more in the world. So universal design is not only for those who have disability now.
Thanks, Anna. Same question to you. You may also reflect on the other comments. If not best practice, are there any emerging practice or promising examples that that we can highlight?
The hardest question that you asked us, I have to admit, and I thought about it carefully. So the examples I'm going to give, I call them accidental examples because I don't think the people actually thought about inclusive design necessarily when doing that. One example is actually from the nursing home I do my research on. And it's not there anymore, so they failed, right? But in 1970s, so we're talking about small rural nursing home, right? It's been there since 1969, right? And in 80s, they actually opened a cinema in the nursing home, right? So people actually went to the nursing home just to watch movies, like once or twice per week, right? It's not there anymore, but I do think it's an amazing practice, right? We're opening up places that are usually isolated and somewhere in the margins of cities and towns. So another, I think, good example is, and going back to what I said about this perceived notion that I'm not welcomed, whether I'm a person with disability or I'm an older person or maybe I'm a new parent and I feel unwelcomed, I do think by opening up spaces at first specifically for, like, for instance, Kino Biza, Cinema Biza, that they have these senior mornings, and they call that silver braid, which I love, right? So they opening up places that a lot of, for instance, including my mother, she feels welcomed in theater for some reason, but she does not feel welcomed or free in cinemas or in cafes, right? So by creating specific, like, mornings or afternoons, for instance, for seniors or for new parents, we're kind of saying, we want you here. It is for you, and then maybe one day we won't need those, specific, like, times for seniors, right? But we are opening up, and I think that's a good example. Those mornings or afternoons for new parents, for instance, or senior events, right? And another small.
So they're not examples by design or by conscious design.
Yeah.
If you like, they're by driven by individuals or by accident. That's
why I call them by accidental, right? But they reached what we wanted, right? They are opening up these spaces and saying, we're all coming together. So, and I thought specifically about examples tackling loneliness, and I do think these are good examples. And of course, they are more determined, I would say, examples, but I do think the problem is what Barbara mentioned, that a lot of these ideas or emerging ideas are project-based financially, so there's no continuity to them, and they fail, to proceed, basically.
So, LAMPA is a conversation festival, but if we also for a moment should turn it into a transformation festival, i.e. come with recommendations of what should be done, and given the depth and the width of the situation here in Latvia, we should, as I understand it from you, maybe this is a big question here. But when we say something should change, then someone should do something differently. Where would you point? Who is it? The lawmakers, the decision makers? Is it the interest groups? Is it us as individuals? Where should that push for more inclusive design come from?
I just saw in our audience many architects, and I think they are really force, because they are following already accessibility legislation for the years, and nowadays any one public or private space couldn't be accepted after the building if it doesn't require to accessibility. So in that case, in Great Lines, we are on a way. Of course, there is some exclusions in this process, but that is, and last period is really carefully taken about different kind of accessibility, but of course there is not one rule, because if we are talking about inclusiveness in generally, we all like to be included, or we like to be take care. But if we are talking about special situation solving, or special problem solving, then we of course should take in consideration the user profile, and the user profile is very, very different in different ways. So of course we cannot create paradise on earth in every time, but I also don't believe in solutions what is good for all. best part, what we can do, we should do. But it includes, again, a really great collaboration, interdisciplinary collaboration among specialists in different fields, because every case will be different and special one, and there is no recipes, actually.
But when you think, there's a question, let's get a microphone down here. It's coming now.
I just couldn't that your comment about the building code, that all the architects are following it and you cannot finish the building if you're not. But as we all know, I think you can really see when the building is finished if the building code is followed just for a check mark, or is it really with the intention of inclusiveness? Because in building code, there's no social aspect. It just says that person with the walking or any other disability has to get in the room. Nice, but it doesn't mean that it's happening in an inclusive way, because inclusive way would be that they walk in the same way that everyone else. No one has to help them. They don't have to press any buttons, nothing. But usually how it's done for a check mark, it's they have to go around the corner, press a button, wait for something, then someone comes, oh, the ramp is not working, and so on, so on. Building code is great, but this social aspect has to be included in it somehow. I don't know how, but it has to be there.
But the social issue is very, very simple, at least. In certain stage, you should involve someone who could help you to check, because testing and checking is also allowed during all the processes if we are creating products or services or even buildings.
Yeah, but checking is happening with the checklist that follows the building code.
Yeah, but that...
And then we have the result?
Yeah, but that is a human issue. If you don't like to build your building in the best way and to be proud of that what you did and not to add some special testings or checkings or idea exchanging with different users, then of course you can't achieve this result.
But when we spoke before the debate the other day, we talked about this almost like a co-creative process, or the process of changing perspectives. And I think, Baiba, you were mentioning that when you walk with someone, they start seeing your perspective. And obviously the building code is blind for the perspectives.
Yes, but the building code can become more human and more social if we involve somebody who really needs that accessibility, right? We can have that checklist, and that's okay. But if we do the checking off together, for example, with you, we will do that differently. You will see that you cannot push me up to the 90-degree ramp, or you will see differently. So that could bring the social aspect, right, that we involve at least one person who helps us to see is it usable or not. Because the situation you described with the buttons and the not working ramps or elevators, wow, I have countless examples like that, right? Especially if I go with my electric wheelchair, which is totally different story. Because with this wheelchair, I can be at least lifted up, which is not the best solution. But my electric chair, 120 kilos, nobody wants to lift that. So, yeah.
So how do we give life to the building codes? Anna? Barbara? How do we give life to the building codes? How do we, I mean, something goes wrong process-wise, it sounds like.
Time. It needs time to change attitude and to start to co-create, because co-creation takes a lot of time, more times than actually if you are designing something by yourself and you are thinking that you are doing the best what you can do. So I don't know, again, in every case it is a different. In small project it will take less time, in big projects more and more.
And also explanation behind those checklists and codes, because sometimes it is what is lacking, because we give the restrictions, give the rules, and we don't explain them, why they are there. And that creates hesitancy and rejection, right? And because of that, I think there are those curious, those humorous examples of accessibility, because people do that just because they need to do that. Otherwise, they will be punished, but they don't understand the soul behind that.
Anna?
It's also always crucial question about designer involvement in different kind of projects, even in those of accessibility, not just of the buildings, but of products and processes. We're talking already a long time about need of design profession in every field, not just designing new products, but to make better this checking list if there is a kind of complex thinking and need to see the context and also the risks and also opportunities.
So time is important to understand, but obviously the cost of rushing means that you end up paying with less inclusion, as I understand it. Anna, your reflection on this, and maybe as you have the microphone, then if Latvia were to look for examples from outside of Latvia, you know, where would be a good place to look?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to answer the previous one. My first answer is a bad joke that you can change things. It's a lawmaker who has a relative with mental health issues, who has an older mother, who has a relative with a disability, right? That's a bad joke, but it's actually also a reality. That's why it's so, ironic. The other answer, I'm going to give you a quick example. Like 2 weeks ago, I came back from a meeting in Luxembourg with Alzheimer Europe. That's an NGO across Europe that fights for the rights with those living with dementia, and also for supporters and carers who live with people with dementia, right? And I met with carers group, right? Those who have spouses or parents with different sorts of dementia. And I asked, and they always have these representatives from across Europe, so they're actually looking for active people. There was Serbia, Ireland, you name it. And Latvia has never been represented in Alzheimer Europe. And the quick answer why is that we don't even have our own association. So to be represented on European level, to actually fight on European level for the rights of those people, you need to have an association here, and we don't have that. So my answer to that is it starts with an interest group. I do think it starts with a significant lobbying of interest groups. That afterwards involves designers, whatever's needed, but it has to be lobbying. And looking for examples, for instance, speaking about older adults or people with dementia, right? And the numbers are rising, right? Ireland is a good example, but it also started like 15 years ago. Diagnosis process for dementia, for instance, took 5 years, especially if it was early onset dementia. But severe lobbying for years, they have actually moved the process. It's quicker, and politicians start. They can't avoid them anymore. They're making noise and they're making it loud, so they make actually to hear them, right? So I do think that's one of the good example in general how to use EU funds for for not building necessarily roads, but actually for humans, and because we don't have other resource here in Latvia, just people. And another good example, I do think, also thinking about these intergenerational spaces. There've been I can't say project-based, but for instance, I know of certain practices, I'd say, for instance, in Germany, where NGO was involved, but it put together, for instance, young students who are looking for places to live, to share apartment with an older adult, right? They have companionship, they live together, they help each other, and it's also about spending time together, it's helping out each other, and it was NGO based. Or for instance, Serbia had maybe a bit weirdly, the way they described wasn't maybe my word of choice, wouldn't be, but they had adopt a grandparent kind of thing, where the state basically was involved in creating close relationships between strangers. And the idea was that there are lonely older adults out there, but there are also families for instance, whose parents have died, or grandparents live far away, and they want these meaningful connections for their kids. And in some cases it failed, and it worked. It worked.
Baiba, I also want to go you just on this question of where should we look for that change. So we believe that we should push the society towards more inclusion. Obviously, trains and toilets should be fixed in a way that it isn't as you've described. You're heading up an activist group. Is it interest groups that we're hearing? Is that where we should be looking to sort of counter the lack of translated policies into meaningful reality, or where should the push come from?
I do agree about the interest groups, but also the dialogue between different interest groups. Because, for example, I can speak about the disability field the most. I know that there are too many interest groups in disability field.
There are too many?
Too many, and I will explain what I mean by that. It's okay that they are there, but too often they cannot agree among themselves. So they go to policymakers and say different things, and for policymakers, right? Because they do not know to whom to listen to. Either inclusive schools are good or bad. One is saying good, other ones are saying bad. And so which interest group screams louder, they get their way. But So
they should be joining forces instead?
Yes.
Okay.
I think, especially in so small country, we have countless interest groups for people with disabilities. When I looked, I was really surprised.
Okay.
Like 30, 40, 50 more. So.
Yeah. It's a separate conversation on why they're not joining, because obviously it seems like that should be a natural interest of them. But we do have 5 minutes left, and as I stated initially, the debate here is part of a Nordic relay debate. At the next Democracy Festival in Estonia, a panel will discuss loneliness among young adults. And what I've asked all three of you is to come prepared with a question. Now, the thing is, there's only there can only be one question that's being debated in Estonia. So we will now hear the questions from Baiba, Barbara, and Anna, and then you get to vote on which question should be discussed in Estonia. You want to go first, Anna?
Sure.
What is the question they should ask?
So my question is, in what ways can inclusive design in Estonia's urban planning and digital landscape foster unexpected social interactions among young adults, and how can we measure the impact of these designs on reducing loneliness?
Okay, I should be moderating that debate. That is a very long question, Anna, I have to say. Okay. Barbara?
Actually, my partner helped me to invent the question because we are always in competition with Estonians. And there is a fact again what we can change. They have islands. They have 2,355 islands. We Latvians have no one island. So my question is about, did they make research, or are they going to make research, those Estonians, the measurement of loneliness of islands and on a land?
Okay.
What is the difference?
So there's measurement on loneliness on islands versus mainland.
Yes.
And in short, your question was about urban...
Inclusive design and urban planning.
Stop. Inclusive design and urban planning. Otherwise, we can't remember it. Inclusive design and urban planning.
The question. Fails the entire idea of it.
It's being live streamed, so we do get the full question, Anna. Baiva, what would your question be?
My question would be about the inclusive thinking, how inclusive thinking and humor can help to avoid social exclusion and loneliness.
Very good. You heard all the questions. So there's humor and loneliness and inclusive design. There's loneliness on islands versus mainland. I'm definitely cutting this really, really short. And then there's Anna's very long question, which was about urban planning and inclusiveness. So can I see a show of hands for Baiba's question? Are you counting? That's about 15. Can I see a show of hands for Barbara's question on the island versus mainland? You're putting your hand up too many times, Stefan. Can I see a show of hands for Anna's question? Do we have a winner here? I think Baiba's is the winner.
I really want to know the answer to that question. So you need to send me the answer.
It'll be live streamed. It'll be live streamed, and I have your phone number, Baiba. So otherwise, I'll get it. I'll get it to you. I might even get you the link to the debate so you can follow it.
Thank you.
So we've got about a minute and 55 seconds left. Is there any burning question here to this really competent panel? There is a question down there. Let's get a mic. Ooh, it's right there. Can you state your name first?
Yeah.
Get up and then ask the question.
It's not a question, a comment that came to my mind.
That's allowed.
I'm from Poland. I was studying landscape architecture there. And I think they were showing us for a year all these technical drawings, how to do the slope, what kind of slope, and so on. But there was one professor who just put us on the wheelchair and asked us to go through the campus for like 3 or 4 classes in a row. And that was really transformative for me, for the whole professional experience I have now. And
so it helped change your perspective?
Yes, because otherwise you learn about the slope, but you don't imagine. I was afraid to go on this wheelchair down on the slope that's theoretically okay. So I think it was the most empathic or empathy teaching class, and I think thinking long perspective in accessibility topic or inclusive design, it would be good to think about education
of urban planners, landscape architects, and architects. And the other thing is I encountered while I was studying for my PhD landscape, informal landscapes in Tartu in Estonia. And there were this Soviet block housing areas, there are these gardens under the balconies. And there are these grandmas who do these gardens every day. And living here in Igutsiems in Riga, I also noticed that they are an excuse to meet together. So I would say that non-design or appreciating what's already there is also important. So we don't need to invent new things in public space, but it would be just enough to invest, I don't know, make a festival of these gardens and appreciate what's there, because maybe community gardening for those people who remember old times, it's a little bit too Western idea, but they have their own ways to socialize, and it's really, I have like hundreds of photos of these gardens. They are super beautiful. So I would say this noticing what's happening in public space and appreciating it, what's happening informally, it is also a good practice to do. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that perspective. And I reckon that with the panel that we've had here and the discussions we've had around giving life to the building codes or changing perspectives is a really valuable one. So thanks a lot for that. We've come to the end. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Baiba. Thanks to Barbara. Thanks to Anna for taking your time to be here. Have a good festival.